Before kings ruled nations, before cities filled the earth, there was only darkness, silence, and a beginning. Then, light broke through the darkness, and creation began to breathe for the very first time. Humanity began in a garden, not in fear, but in peace. Adam and Eve lived with purpose, surrounded by life. But freedom came with a choice. In the quiet of Eden, temptation whispered that they could become their own gods. One decision changed everything. They left Eden carrying the weight of a broken world. Pain entered human life. Work became hard. Outside the garden, sin spread quickly. Jealousy entered the human heart. Brother turned against brother. Generations passed, and the earth filled with people. But instead of goodness, corruption grew. Noah was not powerful like a king. He was not famous like a warrior. But he obeyed. While others mocked, he built. Every piece of wood. Then the rain came. The skies opened. The deep burst forth, and the ark rose above a drowning world. When the waters fell, the earth began again. Noah stepped onto a washed world, and a rainbow stretched across the sky. But human pride returned. People gathered to build a tower, not to honor God, but to make a name for themselves. Then the story narrowed to one man. Abraham heard the call to leave everything familiar and walk toward a promise he could not yet see. Abraham had no child, but he had a promise. God told him to look at the stars and count them if he could. His descendants would be like that. The promise passed from Abraham to Isaac, and from Isaac to Jacob. These were not perfect men. Their families carried fear. Jacob's son Joseph was hated by his brothers. They sold him away, thinking they had buried his dreams forever. Years later, Joseph rose from prison to power. During famine, Egypt had food because Joseph had listened to wisdom. The brothers who betrayed him came seeking bread, but generations passed, and Joseph was forgotten. The family became a nation, and the nation became enslaved. The Hebrews cried under heavy labor. In a time of fear, a baby was hidden in a basket and placed upon the river. His name was Moses, what looked like a helpless child. Years later, Moses met the fire that did not burn out. From the bush, a voice called his name. Moses felt weak and unworthy, but the mission was clear. Moses stood before the most powerful ruler of his world, with nothing but a staff and a command. Pharaoh refused. His heart hardened. On the night of Passover, families waited behind marked doors. Judgment passed through Egypt, but those covered by the sign were spared. It was a night of fear. With the sea before them and Egypt behind them, the people panicked. But Moses lifted his staff, and the waters opened. At Sinai, the freed slaves became a covenant people. They received commands that taught them how to live with God and with one another. The wilderness revealed what slavery had done to their hearts. They complained, feared, doubted, and looked back at Egypt. After years of wandering, a new generation stood at the edge of promise. Moses had led them out, but Joshua would lead them in. The land ahead was beautiful. Time passed, and Israel looked at other nations. They wanted a king they could see, a ruler like everyone else had. David was only a shepherd boy when he faced Goliath. He had no armor, no sword, and no fear of the giant's voice. While others saw size, David saw the living God. David became king, warrior, poet, and worshiper. He loved God deeply, yet he also failed painfully. David's son Solomon built the temple, a house of worship in Jerusalem. For a moment, the kingdom seemed full of wisdom. After Solomon, the kingdom cracked in two. Israel divided, and the people drifted again and again toward idols, injustice, and empty religion. In days of confusion, prophets stood like fire in the darkness. Elijah challenged the people to stop limping between two opinions. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, and many others warned the people. They spoke against injustice, pride, false worship, and cruelty. Warnings were ignored, and Jerusalem fell. The temple was destroyed. The people were carried into exile. In Babylon, Daniel remained faithful. Surrounded by power, pressure, and foreign gods, he prayed as he always had. Eventually, some returned. Walls were rebuilt. Worship began again, but something still felt unfinished. Then, in a small village called Nazareth, the silence broke. A young woman named Mary received a message that would shake history. The king did not arrive in a palace. He came in humility, placed in a manger, surrounded by animals, shepherds, and quiet wonder. Years later, Jesus came to the Jordan River. John baptized him, and the moment marked the beginning of his public mission. Before teaching crowds or healing the sick, Jesus faced temptation in the wilderness. Hunger, power, and pride were placed before him. Jesus began calling ordinary people, fishermen, tax collectors, doubters, and the overlooked. He did not build. On a hillside, Jesus taught about a kingdom unlike any empire. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Love your enemies. Where Jesus went, brokenness met compassion. The blind saw, the lame walked, the ashamed were restored. He touched those others avoided and welcomed those others rejected. One night, the disciples thought the sea would swallow them. Jesus stood and spoke to the storm. Jesus told stories that opened hearts. One was about a son who ran away, wasted everything, and came home ashamed. But the father ran to meet him. Not everyone welcomed him. His mercy offended the proud. His authority challenged the powerful. His truth exposed empty religion. On his final night, Jesus shared a meal with his disciples. He took bread and a cup and spoke of his body and blood. The Passover story was becoming deeper. In Gethsemane, Jesus felt the weight of what was coming. His soul was sorrowful, yet his prayer remained surrendered. He was arrested like a criminal, though he had healed the sick and taught peace. False witnesses spoke. Crowds turned. Leaders judged him. At the cross, the story reached its darkest hour. The one who calmed storms now hung in silence. The one who gave life tasted death. On the third day, the tomb was open. The stone had moved. Death had lost its final word. Jesus was alive, the promise that began in Eden. The disciples were hiding in fear when Jesus stood among them and said, "Peace." Their sorrow became wonder. Their guilt met forgiveness. On the road to Emmaus, Jesus walked with two followers who did not recognize him at first. He opened the scriptures and showed how the whole story had been pointing to him. Before ascending, Jesus gave his followers a command: go to all nations, make disciples, baptize, and teach. At Pentecost, the Spirit came like wind and fire. The same world, once divided by language at Babel, now heard the message in many tongues. The first believers gathered in homes, shared bread, cared for the poor, and preached Jesus as Lord. They were ordinary people with extraordinary hope. Following Jesus wasn't easy. Many faced rejection, prison, and death, but persecution did not destroy the message. Paul, once an enemy of the church, became one of its greatest messengers. He crossed seas, entered cities, faced danger, and wrote letters that still speak today. From Jerusalem, the message moved across nations, languages, and generations. Scrolls were copied. The Bible's history was not only about the past. The Bible is not just a book of ancient events. It is the history of hope. Today, the same story still speaks. It tells us that humanity is broken but not abandoned. From creation to the cross, from the garden to the empty tomb, one promise carried the story forward. Kingdoms rose and fell,